Welcome to my channel. I share new life stories here every day, and I'd really appreciate it if you hit subscribe and like my video. My name is Margaret. I'm 62 years old now, but when this story begins, I was 31. Young, full of energy, full of hope. I had just given birth to my second child, a beautiful baby boy we named Daniel. My daughter Emily was 3 years old at the time, running around the house with her little ponytail bouncing behind her. I love being a mother. I truly did. But I also loved something else, something I have been working towards since I was 18 years old. I loved painting, not just as a hobby. It was my passion, my dream, my future. Before I got married, I had been accepted into an art program at a university 2 hours away from my hometown. It was a small program, but it was prestigious. They only took 12 students each year. I had worked so hard to get in. I had submitted my portfolio, gone through 2 rounds of interviews, and waited by the mailbox every single day for 3 weeks. When the acceptance letter came, I cried. I showed it to my mother, and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. She said, "Margaret, you did it. You're going to be an artist." I believed her. I really did. But then I met David. David was kind, gentle, hardworking. He was a mechanic, and he had this way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the only person in the world. We met at a church picnic, and within 6 months we were engaged. Everyone said we were perfect together, and maybe we were. But when I told him about the art program, he got quiet. He didn't say I couldn't go. He never said that. But he asked me questions. Soft questions. Gentle questions. Like, how will we afford it? And what if we want to start a family? I told him I could do both. He nodded. But I saw the doubt in his eyes. And slowly, quietly, I started to doubt myself too. So I deferred my acceptance for a year. Just 1 year, I told myself. Just until we got settled. Just until we saved a little money. Just until things were more stable. But that year turned into 2. And 2 turned into 5. And then Emily was born. And then Daniel. And somewhere in the middle of diapers and daycare and school pickups and grocery shopping and laundry and cooking and cleaning, my dreams got folded up like old clothes and tucked away in the back of a drawer I never opened anymore. I told myself it was okay. I told myself I was happy. And in many ways I was. I loved my children more than anything in the world. I loved watching them grow. I loved their laughter, their questions, their little hands reaching for me when they were scared or tired. But late at night, when the house was quiet and everyone was asleep, I would sometimes sit at the kitchen table and stare at my hands. Hands that used to hold paintbrushes. Hands that used to create something beautiful. And I would wonder, what if? The years passed quickly. Emily grew into a bright, confident girl. She loved reading and writing, and she was always at the top of her class. Daniel was quieter, more thoughtful. He loved building things, taking things apart, figuring out how they worked. David worked long hours at the garage. He was a good provider. He made sure we had everything we needed. But he was tired, always tired, and I understood. I never complained. I took care of the house. I took care of the kids. I took care of everything. When Emily was 10, she came home from school one day with a flyer. It was for an art camp, a week-long program where kids could learn painting, drawing, sculpture. Her teacher had given it to her because she had done well in art class. Emily handed me the flyer with big, excited eyes. "Mom, can I go? Please." I looked at the price. $250. It was a lot. We didn't have extra money like that. But I saw the hope in her face. The same hope I used to feel. I told her I would talk to her father. That night, I brought it up to David. He frowned. He said, "That's a lot of money, Maggie." I knew it was, but I also knew this was important. So I told him I would pick up extra shifts at the diner where I worked part-time. I told him I would make it work. He sighed. He said okay, and I did make it work. I worked double shifts for 3 weeks. I came home with sore feet and aching shoulders. But when I handed Emily that registration form and told her she could go, the way she screamed and hugged me made everything worth it. She went to that camp, and when she came home, she showed me everything she had learned. She showed me her paintings, her sketches, her clay sculptures. She talked about the instructor, a woman named Miss Patricia, who had told her she had real talent. I smiled. I encouraged her. I told her to keep going. But inside something twisted, because I remembered what it felt like to be told I had talent. I remembered what it felt like to believe in something so deeply that it became part of who I was. And I realized I had given that up, not for myself, but for them. Years went by. Emily got a scholarship to a good university. She studied literature and communications. She graduated with honors. She got a job at a marketing firm in the city. She moved into a nice apartment. She started dating a man named Greg who worked in finance. Daniel went to trade school. He became an electrician. He was good at it. He bought his own truck. He rented a small house on the other side of town. They were both doing well. I was proud, so proud. David and I stayed in the same house, the house where we raised them. It was quieter now, emptier, but we were okay, or at least I thought we were. But then David got sick. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away. He said it was nothing, just a cold, but it didn't get better. And after weeks of me begging him to see a doctor, he finally went. They found a tumor in his lung, cancer, stage 3. I remember sitting in that doctor's office, holding David's hand, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath me. The doctor talked about treatment options, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, but his voice sounded far away, like I was underwater. David squeezed my hand. He said, "We'll get through this, Maggie." And I nodded, because that's what I always did. I nodded. I held on. I kept going. The next year was the hardest year of my life. David went through chemotherapy. He lost his hair. He lost weight. He lost his strength, but he never lost his will to fight. I took care of him. I drove him to every appointment. I sat with him through every treatment. I made him soup when he couldn't eat solid food. I held him when he cried in the middle of the night. Emily and Daniel came to visit, but not often. Emily was busy with work. She said she couldn't take too much time off. She sent flowers. She sent cards. She called once a week. Daniel came more often, but he was building his business. He had clients. He had responsibilities. I understood. I never asked them to do more. But sometimes late at night when I was lying in bed next to David listening to him breathe, I felt so alone. I felt like I was carrying the weight of the world and no one could see it. David passed away on a Tuesday morning in October. The leaves were falling outside the window. The sky was gray. Everything felt cold. I held his hand as he took his last breath, and when it was over I sat there for a long time just holding him, not wanting to let go. Emily came the next day. Daniel came that evening. They both cried. We all cried. But after the funeral, after the guests left, after the casseroles were put in the fridge and the flowers were placed on the table, they both went back to their lives. Emily went back to the city. Daniel went back to his work, and I stayed alone in the house that suddenly felt too big. Months passed. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned. I cooked. I gardened. I volunteered at the church. But no matter what I did, the silence followed me. Emily called me every Sunday. She would ask how I was doing. I would say I was fine. She would talk about her job, her boyfriend, her plans. I would listen. But I started to notice something. She never asked me what I wanted. She never asked me what I was feeling. She just assumed I was okay, because I always had been. One Sunday, she called and told me she was getting married. Greg had proposed. I was happy for her. I truly was. But then she said something that hurt me more than I expected. She said, "Mom, I want to have the wedding at a venue in the city. I know it's far, but it's just easier. And honestly, I don't think you want to help much with the planning anyway. You're not really into that kind of stuff." I held the phone, staring at the wall. Not into that kind of stuff? I had planned every birthday party she ever had. I had sewn her Halloween costumes by hand. I had stayed up late baking cupcakes for her school events, but she didn't remember, or maybe she just didn't think it mattered. I told her I was happy for her. I told her to do whatever she wanted, and when we hung up, I sat in the kitchen and cried. The wedding was beautiful. Emily looked stunning. I wore a dress I had bought on sale and did my own hair because I couldn't afford to go to a salon. I sat in the third row, not the first. The first row was reserved for Greg's parents. months. I didn't say anything. I just smiled. At the reception, I watched Emily dance with her father-in-law. She laughed. She looked so happy, and I was glad, but I also felt invisible, like I was just a guest, not her mother. A few months later, Emily got pregnant. She called me with the news and I cried tears of joy. I was going to be a grandmother. I asked her if she needed help. She said no. She said she had Greg's mother who lived closer. She said Greg's mother had already offered to help with the baby. I understood. I didn't live close. I didn't have much to offer, but it still hurt. When the baby was born, I drove 3 hours to meet him. His name was Jacob. He was perfect. I held him in my arms, and for a moment, everything felt right again. But then Greg's mother walked in. Emily's face lit up. She said, "Oh, Mom, you're here. Can you take him? I need to rest." And she handed the baby to Greg's mother, not to me. I stood there, my arms still warm from holding him, watching someone else cradle my grandson. I left that evening. Emily hugged me at the door and said, "Thanks for coming, Mom." I drove home in the dark, crying the whole way. Months passed. I didn't see Jacob much. Emily sent photos. I sent gifts. But I wasn't part of his life. Not really. Then one day Emily called. She sounded stressed. She said Greg's mother was going on a trip and couldn't babysit. She asked if I could come stay for a week. I said yes. Of course I said yes. I packed my bag and drove to her house the next morning. That week I took care of Jacob. I fed him. I changed him. I rocked him to sleep. Emily went to work. Greg went to work. And I did everything. I also cleaned the house. I did the laundry. I cooked meals. On the last day, Emily came home early. She walked into the kitchen and looked around. She said, "Wow, Mom. You really didn't have to do all this." I smiled. I said, "I wanted to help." She nodded. Then she said something I will never forget. She said, "You know, I wish you had done something more with your life, like a career or something. Then maybe you'd understand how hard it is to balance everything." I stood there, frozen. She didn't even realize what she had said. She just picked up her phone and walked into the other room. And I stood there alone in her kitchen, feeling like my heart had been ripped out. I drove home that night. I didn't cry. I just felt numb. When I got home, I walked into my bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, behind the winter coats and old boxes, I found it. My old portfolio. I pulled it out and sat on the bed. I opened it slowly. Inside were paintings I had done when I was young. Sketches, drawings, pieces of my soul I had forgotten existed. I stared at them for a long time, and then I cried. Not because I was angry, not because I regretted my choices, but because I realized something. I had given up my dreams so my children could have a better life. But in doing so, I had made myself invisible. I had loved so quietly, sacrificed so silently, that they didn't even know I had dreams in the first place. A few weeks later, I started painting again. Just small things at first. A flower, a sunset, a memory. I set up a little corner in my house with an easel and some paints I bought from a craft store. And slowly I started to feel like myself again. Emily called me one Sunday. She asked how I was. I told her I was painting. There was a pause. She said, "Painting? Like art?" I said yes. She sounded surprised. She said, "I didn't know you liked art." I smiled. I said, "There's a lot you don't know about me, sweetheart." We talked for a little while longer, and when we hung up, I felt something shift. Not everything, but something. I don't know if Emily will ever fully understand what I gave up. Maybe she will. Maybe she won't. But I've learned something important. I can't wait for other people to see my value. I have to see it myself. I gave up my dream so my children could have a better life. And I would do it again. But this time, I'm also giving myself permission to dream again, because I deserve that too. Soft piano music fades in. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt invisible, I want you to know something. You matter. Your sacrifices matter. Your dreams matter. Even if no one else sees them, even if no one else remembers, you are not invisible. You are enough. And it's never too late to pick up the pieces of who you once were and start again. Thank you for listening to my story.